All right. We are officially live. Everybody who's joining us now is probably like wondering what were they talking about before we.
They'll never know.
They'll never know. They'll never know. Excellent.
I think Russia knows, though.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Russia always knows everything.
That's what we need to assume these days.
I thought it was association governance, not U.S. governance.
Maybe it's Russia CAE.
There you go. Awesome. Well, it looks like we have some viewers jumping on and off looking here, so let's just wait a few more minutes and let everybody kind of come in. I'll leave them a message in the event page. Okay. All right. This is a quiet bunch. Quiet bunch.
Are we supposed to be telling jokes?
Yeah. This is the pregame.
I think if we rely on Brandon to be funny, we're going to lose some audience members.
Definitely.
And maybe some panelists.
Yeah.
I know dad jokes. That's it.
Oh, do it.
I can't think. I had a good one recently.
Nothing says a young professionals webinar like dad jokes.
Right. It's fitting. It's very fitting.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, it looks like we have some folks jumping on the call, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first ever Drinks and Discover with ASAE Young Professionals. My name is Jacob Wilder, and I'm the Director of Communications and Technology with the Building Owners and Managers Association of Georgia. I have the pleasure of serving on ASAE's Young Professionals Committee, and I have worked with many talented and respected association professionals, including those on this call, to help bring today's program. This virtual happy hour program is centered around the discussion of how YPs are changing the association governance landscape. And since this is a happy hour, I hope you're joining the program with your favorite beverage in hand. Please be sure to share in the comments section of the event page what you're drinking on. I'm sure that myself and everybody else on the call would love to know. I am actually enjoying Red Hair. It's a Marietta, Georgia, which is, I'm from Georgia, so drink local, long day lager. And so I'm joined by 6 respected association management professionals, and I'll briefly introduce each one and ask them during our Mugshots Icebreaker to share and show what they're drinking on with everybody. So we'll see how that goes. Starting with Brandon Robinson, CAE and BSAE Executive Director with Eisenman and Associates. Brandon, tell us about yourself. What are you drinking on?
Well, my what are you drinking on is a bit of a failure for the day. I'm actually drinking water in my office because Brandon this morning in his hurry to get out the door forgot his drink. But what it was going to be, so I could tell you that, because that's interesting, I guess, was my in-laws love to travel to Europe, and they always bring me back these very bizarre little liquors and liqueurs. So there's this one from Iceland. I can't even pronounce it, much less spell it. But it's clear and it's pretty tasty. So I was going to sip on that, but failure. But I'm Brandon Robinson with Eisenman Associates, and I serve as the executive director for the Virginia Society of Association Executives based in Richmond, Virginia.
Cool. Well, that sounds great. I hate that you weren't able to bring your drink with you today.
You and me both, brother. It's been one of those days.
It's been one of those days. You could use it.
Yeah.
All right, next up we have Lauren Hefner, MPA and CAE. She's the Vice President of Stakeholder Relations with the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association. Lauren, tell us about yourself and what you're drinking on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So glad to be hanging out with you today. I'm slightly less boring than Brandon in the sense that my water has bubbles in it.
No bubbles.
Otherwise, it's not that exciting. I work for, as was shared, I work for the Healthcare Business Women's Association. We are a 100% virtual global organization. So I work out of my home. I'm in my beautiful living room in the Richmond, Virginia area as well.
Awesome. Well, at least you did take it to the next level past Brandon.
He's got bubbles. I don't have bubbles.
All right. Next up, if he can join us, he was having some issues with his mic earlier. Lowell Aplebaum, CAE, and he serves as a commissioner on the CAE Commission. Lowell, can you share with us a little bit about yourself and if you're drinking on anything?
Hey everyone, I'm Lowell Aplebaum. I am on the CAE Commission. I help associations right now with membership and value and chapter relations and volunteers and global and all sorts of good stuff like that. I also started a master level learning series called Through the CEO Lens. And what am I drinking on? This is what I'm drinking on. It is a collaboration between Boulevard Brewing and Pretty Things Brewing. It's called Collab 3. It's a Yorkshire single type of beer, 8.5%. It's a partial sour mash, partially aged on oak barrel, and it is delicious.
Uh-oh. I thought we lost you right there at the end, Lowell, but Lowell is our resident beer expert, so we're definitely glad to have him on the call. And he's not too bad at association management either, so definitely we'll add to the conversation.
We all have our strengths. That's fine.
Next up, we have Gabriel Eckert, FASAE, CAE, and he serves as the Executive Director of the Building Owners and Managers Association of Georgia. He is my Executive Director, so I have to be kind to him on this call. Gabriel, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're drinking on today.
Great. Well, thanks. It's fun to be here. Brandon, when you were talking about interesting liquors and such from Europe and other places, it made me think the most interesting liquor I have at home is one from Iceland called Brennivin, and it's in my freezer being chilled, and I may have that in honor of this event today in what you mentioned. But at the office, a little bit more bland. I have another conference call directly after this, so I'm double fisting some water right now. But I did want to bring something that would be reminiscent of what I might have in addition to Brennivin tonight, which would be beer. So I did bring this super fancy antique beer stein from Germany.
Wow.
And pretty excited to have some beer tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabriel. And then next up, we'll have Emily Reineke. She's a senior associate at MCI USA. Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're drinking on?
Absolutely. So I'm happy to join you all today. I am actually hanging out in a bar. We convinced them to open early for us. Lowell is across the room from me, so we're with Matt Coffendoffer, who some of you might know from ASAE. So I will also give you a full description of my beer since I have the menu as well. I am drinking Firestone Walker Pilsner. It's a German Pilsner. And it's dry hopped, and it is 5.3 ABV, in case you want to know. So cheers to you all. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, awesome. I like the description of that. I might have to try some of that. And then last but certainly not least is Adam Thocher, CAE, and he is a senior account executive at Kellen. Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're drinking on.
Hey, it's thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. But before I do that, I just have to say to all of you people who think that any kind of liquor from Iceland is good, I don't know if we can be friends anymore. I'm sorry. You can't have any part of that, especially the Brennivin. That's just bad stuff. But I have a nice vintage 2016 Nestle Pure Life water. It is tasty, no bubbles, and it came from a hotel here in Chicago where it's still 4 o'clock. So I've got plenty of work left to do today.
Oh, goodness. Well,
so you paid $9 for that water.
At least.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Adam. And I guess nobody got the memo about, bring a drink to this meeting, but, it's okay. At least we got a few party animals on this call. So anyway, that was fun. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brandon to start today's discussion of how young professionals are changing the association governance landscape. Brandon?
All right, thank you, Jacob. Well, I'll take the moniker moderator, but I'm going to use that term very, very loosely. This is meant to be a very interactive discussion here, and the good news is I am surrounded by some really smart people with a lot of credentials and a lot of knowledge, and none of them are shrinking violets. So that's good. So we'll have a healthy conversation. So, I guess to kind of get us started and give us a framework here, a few weeks ago, a few of us got together within this group to say, okay, here's the broad question. We're looking at YP impact on association governance. And so what are some of the things that we might be able to talk about related to that? Kind of give us some guidelines or overall themes. So we kind of came up with some ideas, and hopefully in the next, let's see, I don't even know where the clock is anymore, the next 40 to 50 minutes, we can touch on most of these 5 general areas. But again, it's going to be, I think, very free-flowing. Hopefully everyone will be very participatory so we can have this conversation. But the 5 general areas I think we're going to be able to hit over the next little while is volunteer leadership, change management, relationships and leadership, and how relationships influence that, culture, and then diversity. So let me kind of just get us started, and I'm going to delve into well, I'm going to pick on Adam and delve into kind of the relationships and leadership piece. So I think one of the things we talked about was the importance of relationships and how they're important and how that can affect governance structure, because I think intuitively, at least for me, I think relationships, governance structure, they're 2 completely different things. I mean, one's kind of way on the soft side and one's much more of a hard piece. So how can, and this is, I guess, directed right at you, Adam, to get us started with some conversation here, how can YPs manage, cultivate, or otherwise work on relationships as a way to affect governance structure?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of ways we can do that. I mean, that's what our jobs are, essentially, right? We're, hey, look, it's Matt and Lowell. Sorry, this is weird. When I'm doing this on a phone, I see only certain people at certain times.
Can you see me?
No, yeah, now I can. Relationships are the name of the game, right? If we are going in to change governance structures at an association, we have to start by building our relationships, and we've got to start that by making sure that we become the trusted source in the room. And I can probably start with saying there are a couple of ways that we don't want to do that. And one of those ways is not to run into the room and tell, our board members or our volunteer leaders whose organization that it is exactly what they need to change. We need to build our buy-in over time and develop our relationship with our members, with our volunteer leaderships, and really identify the changes that we want to make over the course of, our time with the organization. When we start, we might be experts in association management, but we're not experts with that organization just yet. So don't go charging like a bull through the china shop.
Does that, I don't know, does that almost like speaking from experience?
A little bit, right? I'm not really a bull in a china shop usually, but I mean, you have to take it slow. From experience, it's easy to walk in and say, why are you doing it this way? This is how other people do it. I've been really successful in other organizations or watching other people be successful, changing governance by doing this with their board or holding meetings in this way. But until you experience a cycle, until you understand why the leaders have set up their organization the way they have, it's really difficult to make a solid and informed decision on what you want to change or what should be changed.
Well, I mean, candidly, I picked on you a little bit there because in my own personal experience, one of the first times I sat in the ED chair, I didn't literally barge into a boardroom like a bull in a china shop saying blah 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 blah, but there was an essence to that. And it was certainly a lesson learned about that. So, what are some other thoughts out there on kind of this relationship piece and the importance of relationships and how and why they might be important to leadership development for young professionals?
I think Adam presented one version, which is, of course, coming in, and the first thing you do is come in and shake things up. I think often when you come to a governance structure, though, you're talking more about like a path or a journey, not just a single appearance. And so, if that's the case, if you're like building your volunteer experience over time, then it's all about the relationship, right? What's your relationship to the organization, to the volunteer establishment in place, of those who know you and those that you recruit to be the new volunteers. And that's the case, and hopefully you're not coming in like a bull in a china shop, but you're thinking about how do I integrate with the culture, where's the culture trying to drive in terms of mission, vision, and how having a volunteer voice can I supplement and improve that mission and vision through my volunteer efforts.
I think we might have lost a little bit on the back end there.
I would say though, Brandon, and to piggyback on what Lowell and Adam were saying, I think from my standpoint, relationships are a foundational piece to governance. So while they're certainly different, if you think about it, if we have a strong relationship, then there's a better ability to be honest and to be vulnerable and frankly to disagree. And that's healthy in an organization, and it's healthy for governance. And so to the degree that we can have a solid relationship, it means that we can have all that put on the table, we can make better decisions, and at the end of the day, when we disagree on things and we have a relationship, we can then move on together with the organization because we know each other more than just in the professional sense.
Yeah. I love that idea because I think about something someone said to me one time, one of those little adages that stick with you, and he said, you can be right 100% of the time, but if you don't have a relationship, they don't like you, forget about it. If they like you and you've got a strong relationship, there's a leeway to, and I think, Gabriel, you said disagree, but disagree, make mistakes. So it's that relationship, that human connection was almost like a foundation for that.
Yeah,
can I chime in really quick? I just want to share that I think that a lot of time, I know for my organization, and a lot of our members are very senior, they're executives, and they tend to be in kind of the old boys network, even though we're a women's organization, in the sense that many of them have been working together for 10, 20, 30 years. And there's this perception among them that young professionals, or that dreaded term millennials, which is basically anybody born my age through, I think current 17-year-olds, that we don't stay in our jobs for long, that we are very aggressive, but that then we aren't going to get the job done. And I think that is detrimental. And so I think sometimes it's about acting up and leading up and trying to identify ways that we can bridge that gap with people and have them see us as more than just the age that we are.
Was someone else jumping into there a minute ago?
No, I mean, I think Lauren covered that. I was going to say something kind of similar along those lines and then build on that a little bit and say sometimes when we're building that foundation, we have to realize that not always will our organization be ready to change with us. So we have to take that time, and a relationship isn't a one-time thing. So we have to build a relationship not just with our current board, but with all of our members and our volunteers who will come after those current leaders who are in their position, because you might not have the opportunity to affect change for 1, 2, 3, or even 5 years.
Yeah. And as someone who's naturally impatient, sometimes that's a hard lesson to learn. And you used one word which I'm going to smoothly segue, change and change management. Which was one of our kind of 5 topic areas there. And I think, Emily, we were talking about this going back to whenever that practice or earlier conversation was about change management. So we've been talking about change management and the importance of relationships and building that structure. So I guess let's take it to the next step, and I'm going to throw it at you, Emily. How can YPs help affect positive change to their governance structure? So, I mean, how can they do that? That's a really broad question.
It is. I'll try to take a chunk out of it. I would say that to start with, I always think about how you can rephrase words. And so change management is something that is different, which sometimes has a negative connotation, especially for others who are more set in their ways or have done things for X amount of years in one way. And so how do we gently talk about topics? Is it, let's make improvements, let's make incremental changes. You know, one of the things I'm dealing with right now, I'm a new executive director at an AMC, is, you know, our reporting structure. We've been sending tons of reports to tons of people on a weekly basis, and I don't know that that's necessarily helpful. And so my version of change management is really small, actually, and it's in weekly reports, and it's distilling information down to what is actually important instead of bombarding people with facts. And so I guess that would be my first kernel of advice, is how are you conscious of the language that you use when you talk about different things that might have a negative connotation? So how do you rephrase them differently? I think the second is willingness to try. It doesn't always work out awesome. We always hope it does, of course, but the willingness to try, the willingness to be open to new ideas, and usually from some type of idea, something good happens. It might not be the initial idea that we all started with, but incremental change is a good thing. And so that would be my second piece of advice, is just start wherever you are and be willing to take a stab at it.
Okay, I think that's great, and you know, this idea of incremental change, and you don't have to come in, you know, which goes back to the bull in the china shop piece. You don't have to come in and go, hey, let's change it all. So probably a good time too, just to remind folks, you can throw out questions too on the Q&A feature for those who are listening in. Throw out questions, and we will see them and try and work them into the conversation. So, well, getting back to the change management piece, and Emily, you can take this, or anyone, talk a little bit about kind of the tension on that. So I think you touched on a little bit incremental change, big change, but talk a little bit about the tension between the experience and too much change and change for change's sake versus kind of incremental and how to get into a mindset of doing that. Because sometimes I think, you know, you come in and you see things so different and you're just like, well, we got to do all this stuff. You can take it, or anybody.
Well, I'll give it a first shot, and then I'd love someone else to chime in. I think the moniker of change for change's sake is a slippery slope. I think that it's really important to think about the changes you're making and why. When you're new, when you have a different perspective, it's a really important moment. And if you can justify your changes with it being easier for someone or more clear to understand, those changes are more easy to accept because it actually makes your volunteers' lives easier, that you give them the exact information they need at the time they need instead of overwhelming them. And so that would be my first thought, is to be mindful of the change you're making and to be intentional about it, as opposed to just saying, I'm new, I want to try something different.
You know, Emily, I think that I like your language about being mindful about the change that we're making, because one of the things that comes to my mind is that I think it's really helpful, regardless of age, for us to be aware of our own internal response to change. You know, are we someone that thrives on change and just really works well in that environment, or are we the opposite? Neither is good or bad, but it's just, you know, the way things are. So one, understanding our own mindset or internal response to change, and then understanding those around us. So our staff team, our volunteer leadership, how are they play individually and collectively in their internal responses to change, because that'll help us with communicating the why, as you mentioned, the what, the practicality of what's happening, but also to really understand that people adapt and accept change differently. And the last thing that I would add in that I think is really helpful, particularly going into a new position, is to think about that incremental change that you were referencing or alluding to, in that I think it's typically helpful to build with the smaller changes first, if possible, rather than going in after the biggest thing that we can do to make an impact in the organization. Because as we make small incremental change, we start to build buy-in, we start to build some early wins, and then that culture of adaptation to that change becomes a lot better as well.
I also think that the term change itself implies different things. I mean, by change, do we mean creation? Do we mean evolution? Do we mean editing? Do we mean something that's going to get less? Change doesn't really give direction, right? Change is just a switch, but to actually give the direction you're looking to shift your current state, I think it's much more impactful than just using the word change.
Right, and I'd say along those same lines, I mean, a lot of that goes back to your relationship building, right? As long as we have good relationships with our volunteer leaders and we've demonstrated that our commitment is to the future of the organization, then we can make mistakes. Not all of our changes are going to be successful, and the better our relationships are, the more easy those mistakes will be when you actually make them.
Nice. Look at Adam tying back to the relationships piece. It's all interwoven, folks. It's all interwoven. Nothing stands in a silo.
Except for grain.
Except for what?
Grain.
Grain, corn. That's true. Yeah. That's true. Good tip from Chicago. So I think someone mentioned a minute ago, as we kind of talk about change culture and this idea of culture, because I think a lot is being written about culture and how the culture of offices and the culture of our associations and the culture of our boards and our committees, all these places where we're touching people, we're touching our members, our volunteer leadership, and the culture behind that, and this whole generational wave and generational shift between the boomers and then us little bitty Xers, and then the millennials, biggest generation in American history coming, and the culture difference between those three, and how that might or might not be important in a conversation about young professionals and governance structure. So. And I don't have anyone in particular I'm going to put on the spot with this question. So we'll either get crickets or someone will jump in. Talk a little bit about why and how culture is important in a broader conversation about young professionals in association management and governance.
I'll talk on this for a second. Back to what I was sharing earlier. I think that it really is on the organization to make opportunities for people to bridge generational differences, and also to create volunteer opportunities for people at all stages of their career. I know I've been with organizations where basically you are a task force or committee member, and then your very next step is being on your global board. For some organizations, that global board might be a very tactical board, which might be something that is appropriate for a young professional. But in other cases, those are very strategic boards and really reserved for people that have been within the industry for decades. And so I think it really is up to the organization to make sure that they are cultivating relationships with people at all levels of the organization, because if not, I think we are the ones creating those cultural gaps by having the committee members way over here and the strategic board members way over here. So while those things aren't necessarily age-driven, I think experience tends to widen those gaps. So finding different types of opportunities for people to engage all throughout their careers can help have a more, I think, diverse leadership and diverse volunteer pool that really facilitates conversations across generations.
Excellent. Someone else was chiming in, I think.
Yeah, I had a question based on what Lauren said. I'm wondering about the intersect of culture with the board focus on mission and vision wanting to see a larger young professional voice in where an organization is going to go. I'm wondering on some other people have some opinion on where does culture play into either a board's responsibility about what an organization is trying to achieve, or specifically what young professionals can play a role in that direction or in that voice.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just give a quick comment just so there's not silence. Our organization recently deprioritized young people. They actually had a discussion in which they said, we think the best way to get to our mission is to focus on executives at the top of their career and programs related to them. And we are just going to tell you guys to stop pushing our young professionals membership category, just stop worrying about young people. And so for us, we were really afraid that that would create a cultural disconnect where we still have those people that have been part of the organization and drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, for 39 years since our inception, and that we were really alienating the people that would eventually be the ones paying their dues 5 years down the line when those people all retire. So for us, it's about tactically making sure that we continue to keep young professionals on our radar as staff people, even if our board has different ideas. We just continue to find ways to bridge those gaps through our products and services, even if our strategies or our board aren't necessarily pushing that direction. I'd love to hear what somebody else has to say on that, though.
Silence. So, I mean, we're a little different. I mean, we're probably 30% young people, 40% young people. The average age of the 2,500 members in my organization is 45. So, like, we're way ahead of the game. If we didn't prioritize young people and they weren't really a part of our culture, we'd be dying really, really quickly. But on the opposite side of that, trying to affect change with our older generation, they're really receptive because they realize that they are kind of, as they like to put it, the dinosaurs in the room. So they'll make their comments and they say, this is what we think. This is the direction that our profession has gone. But we understand that we're on our way out. So please let us know, where the next steps are coming from. And then they rely on me as their staff leader and the rest of our staff to say, this is what the association world looks like now. This is where the young people, this is what other organizations are doing for the next generation in their memberships. And then they want me to help build that next generation of culture while our old timers, as they like to put it, or the dinosaurs, are still kind of our leaders and our presidents, and the chairs are our task forces.
Those are their terms, old timers and dinosaurs, not yours, right?
Right. I just am adopting them for this discussion.
Well, what I think is interesting is how culture and the culture behind how you talk about and how you implement either programs or services or membership categories or even funneling into a volunteer leadership structure based on your culture. And what I mean by that is there are ways, I think, to be deliberate about it on far ends of the spectrum. I have been involved with organizations where it felt like they were very deliberate about young professionals, both from a membership's perspective and a staff and a volunteer perspective. But it was almost like this. How do I put it? Like, oh yeah, let's give the young people a pizza party and a couple of beers at a happy hour somewhere, and they'll be happy, and send one of those dinosaurs, as Adam calls them, into the room, and they'll network, and then they'll just be happy. This idea of something kind of off the side, just give them something. It's deliberate. It's giving a program, a service, or something to a young professional group, but I think the culture is not centered around integration. Where you go on the other spectrum, and I've seen where be very deliberate about getting young professionals in leadership positions and really integrating them into the organization. So when we talk about culture, I think just being deliberate about young professionals in a governance structure is a start, but that culture behind it, I think, has a drastic influence. I'd be curious what other folks kind of see in the connection between the two?
Right. I think culture that has a goal of happiness for young professionals is going to drive them to places of social gathering or places that they're going to hang out. And I think that associations need to aspire to more than that. I think they need to strive for a culture of meaningful. And hopefully meaningful does include fun, it does include networking, it does include connection. But if we're going to be unique from any other social hangout, then it can't just be for fun, throw them some beers and they're going to want to get together. What's going to be meaningful impact on who they're meeting? What's going to be meaningful impact on their career? What's going to be meaningful impact on their network that's going to help them going together? That's going to help them going forward. And I think that having intent behind the culture you're trying to create will hopefully then direct you how you create that culture. And too few organizations take the time to ask that initial question.
And I think, well, talking about the meaning behind what we're doing and asking the right questions, it really goes back to a couple things. One, I think a culture within an organization to be inquisitive, to be continually learning, and to really think about, what is it that young professionals or other groups within the organizations might need? What are those needs and how can we better understand that? And then the companion piece to that, I think, is to be an organization or to be organizational leaders that really appreciate and understand differences. And what I mean by that is that, based on your stage in your career, based on other background situations that people have, you're going to want and expect and frankly need different things within an organization. And so to be inquisitive and to build a culture where we find out what those things are and appreciate that different members are going to see and need different things and then respond to that, I think is helpful.
And I would love to share. Oh, Adam, go for it.
No, go.
Brandon. Okay, I would just love to share a quick personal story on that. So my association has a young professionals committee. We're a group of lawyers, so they're young professional lawyers. And because they're really active, because they really care, they are one of our most active committees. And our president has them on their radar as future board members. And I love seeing the opportunity that has come by doing something as simple as creating a committee for young professionals. So while I know that doesn't solve everybody's problem, I think that a committee gives people an opportunity to stand up and display leadership, which then can lead into board leadership, advisory committee, presidency, however your organization is structured. It gives an opportunity to stand out to other leaders in your organization, so I think it's really important to offer those if you can.
That was not in response to your comment. I just had a cough. Just for the. So I think a few minutes ago, and this is where I was going to transition this slightly, was when Gabriel was talking a few minutes ago. I think he started to touch on this idea of diversity. And you were using it to kind of set up a response about diversity of thought and diversity of ideas and approaches. So let me just ask broadly: how can young professionals affect conversations about diversity in associations and specifically the governance structure when we think about all these things we've talked about over the last few minutes?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the really positive things, one of the many positive things that young professionals bring to the table in terms of governance or really just in terms of engagement and organization is, I think, a better appreciation and understanding for the positive impact of diversity and creating diversity of thought. And so when I think about governance in BOMA, where Jacob and I have the privilege to serve, one of the things that we take very seriously is the concept of creating diversity of thought, creating a board of directors that is able to see things and represent different perspectives to make better decisions, to be able to build an organization that's inclusive and really engages people in a very good way. And one of the things that I think has been helpful for us is to really have a definition, a shared understanding of what we mean by diversity. Because a lot of times I think when we talk about diversity, we kind of think about those things we can see. We think about race, gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, physical ability. Those typical things come to mind components of what diversity is. But I think in addition to that, we need to think more broadly, because if we base our sole definition of diversity on those inborn human characteristics, then we really could create a board or an organization that might look different, but in fact think alike. And so at BOMA, and I think in a lot of other organizations, we broaden that definition to include those inborn human characteristics, as well as personal experiences, which might include things like religion, educational background, geographic location, all those personal experiences that make us unique and add diversity of thought. We also think about organizational dimensions, which are those career aspects to what we bring to the table. Are we an entry-level professional, mid-career, senior? For BOMA, we think a lot about building engineers, asset managers, property managers, types of property that's managed. So those different aspects of what you do within a profession that make you unique. And then finally, we think about thinking preferences. You know, are you an introvert or extrovert, or a right-brain thinker or a left-brain thinker, and how does that really add to the diversity conversation? So I think young professionals can have a really positive impact in governance or in organizations by helping leaders to kind of broaden their understanding of diversity, and then to help them to really understand how to build a culture that's truly inclusive of all of those dimensions that I mentioned.
Wow. Well said.
Gabriel, I have a question for you on one of the aspects that you talked about, the right brain, left brain, introvert, extrovert.
Yeah.
How do you go about measuring that for some of your volunteers and your leadership positions? Because I thought we were very progressive in a lot of the different ways we measure diversity on our boards and committees, but we don't go quite that far, and that seems very challenging. Can you explain a little more about how you
I'd be happy
go
to.
down that path?
Yeah, so there's a couple, two ways that come to mind right away. First of all, if you're talking about a board specifically, for organizations that have selection committees that might either in person or on the phone interview potential board candidates, or for those organizations that produce packets of information like written responses to questions, one of the most beneficial things we can do is ask open-ended questions and then really actively listen to what's being said. Because the way in which I answer a question is going to reveal part of who I am in terms of how I think, or maybe my behavior, or just my like a disc analysis, if you will. So, for example, if you're saying, you know, what's one of the best moments you've had in this organization since you've been a member, and I talk about all the process that I joined. I came to this luncheon and it was great. This very linear progression. That's going to tell you a lot about I'm a linear thinker. If I'm talking about, oh, I went to the first meeting and I met this person and today we're friends and I've got this great group and it's very social, you're learning more there about a people person. And so you're trying to piece together what they're telling you through the lens of behavior and thinking preferences. In addition to that, we do see some boards of directors today, some nominations committees today, literally using tools to help the board better understand their composition. I think of a couple tools. One, a disc analysis is going to give a board, when you make a composite of it, an understanding of how the board behaves collectively. You can use something like a Herman Brain Dominance Indicator, HBDI, kind of a really wonky name that gets at thinking preferences. So we can look at, you know, gaps within how the board might ask questions or perceive information. But there's a lot of tools like that out there. Some are free, some are paid, that really give boards a composite of this is who we are, this is how we think, and then the smart leaders, I think, take it a step further and say, not only that, but what are the gaps? And then how do we compensate for that? Did that answer your question to some degree?
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's great. I was like, that's a whole different level to from where I thought we would, from where we are right now, and getting there seems like a big hurdle to jump over, but it would be awesome if we could get there. And I'm curious how many other nonprofit organizations are doing that, because it seems like something that is time-consuming, most likely expensive, or it could be very expensive, and associations and nonprofits in general probably don't take that much time to vet their boards, candidates, and volunteer leaderships.
I also
So I'd be interested.
want to reference that if you go to the Aspiring Executive Collaborate group, we just uploaded a webinar on diversity and inclusion that happened last week, and it includes input from the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, now, as well as ASAE staff member Alexis Terry on diversity and inclusion, and on ASAE's diversity. So both of those are good references as in terms of like where to start in terms of trying to bring the diversity and inclusion conversation into your organization.
And just to build on that real quick, to answer or respond to a comment, Adam, that you made about the cost associated with this, I'll give you one free tool that I know other nonprofit organizations use today that helps them better understand the thinking preferences of individuals, and then you can kind of plot it out to make a composite. It's called KeiRSCY, KEIRSCY.com, KEIRSCY.com. There's a paid version and a free version. The free version works really well, and it gives you a good snapshot of individual thinking preferences, and then you can start to map those out as a group to see how you are collectively.
Awesome, thank you. I'll check that out.
You're welcome.
So I want to throw kind of a question bomb out there, see who might want to take a swing at this. You know, we're talking about layers of diversity, how to find diversity, and I feel like I've read somewhere that as you look at the different generations approach diversity in different ways. So, question bomb, I guess I just made up a new term. Are YPs better at diversity than older generations, than dinosaurs?
Better at diversity in what sense?
You define it. It's a question bomb.
I would love to take a stab at that to start. I don't know that we're better or worse. To me, those are ambiguous terms. Back to how I started, language is really important. I think we're different. I think we recognize that there are a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different people and a lot of different viewpoints, and that's to everyone. And so talking to other YPs, diversity is less of a thing out there that we have to tackle. It's more something that's intrinsic to how we interact with people and what we believe and what we do on a daily basis. And so I guess if you want to say, if in my answer, if I equate better with being more aware of it, then yes, we are better at it, because it's a different awareness level. But I don't think that my answer is necessarily the only answer, so I'd love to hear what other people say and how you interpret the word better.
So for me, this is an interesting discussion that I had with a previous supervisor who mentioned that he felt that his children had a bigger sense of the ways that they were different, but also a stronger sense of entitlement to be given particular things for the fact that they were different. And they, by different, I mean they were just, you know, young white males. I mean, there was nothing particularly different about it, but in the sense that they expected special treatment if they didn't turn their homework in late. They wanted to be able to retake tests and things. So I think there are a lot of things where different can be a good or a bad thing depending on how we play it. And the other piece of it that sometimes concerns me a little, and I think my organization has this issue a lot with gender diversity, is on one hand we talk a lot about how people, like for example, young people versus older people, that we should be given the same opportunities that somebody who isn't a young professional should be given. So we try to drive home this idea that we are the same and equal as far as our intellectual capability or our ability to be able to be put on in strategic roles. But then on the other hand, we want to celebrate the differences too, and we talk about the fact that in some ways we hear that millennials, for instance, are more motivated. We are willing to really get in and get the job done and work late hours if we need to work late hours or whatever it is. So I think there's this interesting dichotomy between making sure that we are seen as equal to, I say we, I guess, as I teeter on 34. I'm not sure how long I get to say we when I talk about young professionals, but I'll claim it. I think there's that line between where we get to say that we are the same and deserve the same considerations that somebody with 20 years of experience on us has, versus still celebrating those differences. So are we the same or are we different? And how is that better or worse? And that can be challenging, having it both ways sometimes.
I think I heard someone else popping in too on this question bomb. Hashtag question bomb.
I'll say just one thing very briefly, and I think that I agree, Lauren, with what you were saying about better, worse. I mean, I don't know that those are the lenses through which I would answer this question either. I think when I think about the concept of diversity and young professionals in particular, I think part of it is probably just a more higher comfort level in having the dialogue. A willingness and a comfort level, maybe more uniformly with young professionals, to broach the subject and to be candid and to put the conversation on the table and to begin that's a really positive thing, and I think that's a good thing that young professionals bring to organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I love the thoughts. Well, it was meant to be thought-provoking, and I think those are some excellent thought-provoking answers. Well, I guess, as I kind of look at the clock as we start to tick towards 6 o'clock here on the East Coast, the one area we haven't really gotten into yet is volunteer leadership. And I think we've touched on it as it relates to culture and change and being deliberate about our volunteer leaders. But we haven't really talked specifically about volunteer leadership and how young professionals can either use it from, I guess, the staff side, or if I look at a lot of my fellow panelists or fellow chatters or whatever we're calling ourselves, a lot of volunteer leaders in this group. So how can well, I guess let me back up before I go to that one. Talk about the value in organizations being more deliberate about having YPs engaged in volunteer leadership positions. And I'm going to kind of toss it towards one of our volunteer leadership content experts, Mr. Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Brandon. I feel like it's a no-brainer. How can you not be intentional about wanting to cultivate the next generation of volunteer leaders if you want to see your organization continue to be led? Like, at some point, your current leaders are going to, retire, age out of the profession, and you need another generation to keep coming in. I think how to give intention to that is very different. I think that if you look at young professionals today, I don't think it's just young professionals. I think for this specific subject, I think this really cuts across many different age spectrums and place and life spectrums. A call of volunteers is not asking someone to be a volunteer. That's reactive, right? That's the organization saying, come and ask us to volunteer. And I think that's a lot different than organizations saying, we want to see young professionals involved in these places. And not just that, but we want to find the right young professionals with the right skill sets that are looking to learn the right things to get involved in these places. And we're going to be proactive in that solicitation. We're going to be proactive in that invitation for them to become involved. And then hopefully work with them to determine the path of escalation upon the volunteer position that helps them grow into more senior positions. And I think the intention behind that, for so long it was whoever showed up is the one who was placed in the position, is just not the way it works anymore. And I agree, Brandon, that I look at our panelists, and I think that we have a host of volunteers here. But what I would identify is that I'm guessing we have a host of volunteers that volunteer themselves. And unfortunately, I think that if you just wait for only those that volunteer themselves, you're going to be just scratching the surface of who you want to get involved in your organization, who you want to get involved in your volunteer pool. So, how do we expand that so that maybe those that volunteer themselves, that love volunteering, can help lead the way, but then include those that should be involved, if they're not willing to raise their hand without being invited.
Yeah, I really like two things you said there, Lowell. You kind of started the whole conversation by saying it's kind of like a no-duh thing. And, the association I work for or work with is the Virginia Society of Association Executives. So we're the Virginia version of ASAE, so we're association execs are my members. And the thing that, for lack of a better word, kind of scares me to death sometimes is when I look at the membership and I think about in the next 5 to 10 years, all the amazing leaders who will be candidly retiring, and the knowledge they have that if we don't figure out a way to get them in rooms and volunteer structures with the next generation coming up, that knowledge is walking out the door. So I mean, the no-duh just rings so true to me, because I think, well, if we get those young folks in there and get all that diversity of thought, diversity of age in the room, in our governance structure, in our volunteers, then I think then that knowledge is not walking out the door. That knowledge is coming in the room when we're making governance decisions and being used against other knowledge moving forward. We did get a question from one of our viewers, so I do want to make sure we get this out here. So in an association's culture shift, have any of your organizations, so I'm talking to my panelists here, decided to include YPs in the governance structure? And if so, did any of you struggle on the how? Because, you know, change is hard.
Well, we did sort of, right? So we just, in the past year, gave our students the right to vote, which I guess includes them sort of in their governance structure, which may seem like a very small token, but at the same time, for our volunteer leaders and kind of the industry that we're in, giving that right over to 1/3 of our members who may not stick around after they graduate from their degree-seeking program, like, that was a big deal. So including them now, that means we have a number of younger people eligible on they're on our board because they're more involved at an earlier age, and it gives a voice to the next generation that's coming up. So it helps us, you know, with the pipeline problem that we were starting to see.
How about other folks? How have they done it?
I'll say at BOMA, we've been very intentional about diversifying our board of directors, and we've done that primarily through that concept of diversity of thought we talked about earlier. So those 4 dimensions of inborn human characteristics, personal experiences, organizational dimensions, and then styles and tendencies or thought processes. And it's been great for our organization. So what we didn't do was to put a formal process in place that would allocate seats to certain demographic groups based on age or other factors. I know some organizations do that. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong, but for us, I think in our culture, it didn't make sense, because what I have seen in some organizations is that when we start to allocate board seats based on demographics or segments of the industry, then sometimes people that fill those seats feel like they're representing those groups rather than looking at the whole. And so what we've done instead is it took us a longer period of time, a slower process, but built a culture that was based on an understanding of the importance of diversity of thought and really moving our board forward that way. To where today, I don't know, Jacob, when you say probably about a quarter probably of our board right now is a young professional, I would say, and then larger than that, we have diversity of thought in all the different areas that we've talked about.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. Thanks for pulling me off the bench for that one. But yeah, it's definitely, I would agree. It's the diversity of thought is what you go for. The fact that they bring experience as a young professional only enhances that as part of that entire process. You're welcome.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that one in particular? Since it was, you know, so looking for an example, and I'll say, in boards I've worked with, I've never had one where we've had, to Gabriel's point, a young professional seat on a board, but candidly, I tried to do from a be deliberate about putting young professionals and other groups in different leadership spots so that we get different diversity of thought. And I think, Adam, it might have been you that touched on this a few minutes ago, this idea that, if you don't serve in any kind of volunteer role, volunteer capacity, until you're a grizzled dinosaur, well, then you've got no experience about being a committee member, about being on the board. So being able to get experience at a younger age, I think, has benefits on down the line. So my handy dandy notes here say that it is now the time when I'm supposed to turn it back over to Jacob as we approach the 6 o'clock time frame. But before I do, I'm going to throw all my my panelists a very difficult question. So I'm going to talk a little bit longer, and you can get ready for it. I'm going to ask you for one word. That's your one-word takeaway from this conversation. And I'll go, and you can go in whatever order you want to, but one word takeaway after this afternoon's evening's conversation. Adam, I'm looking at you, so you'll go first.
Man, I'm not good at one words. I was going to say optimistic about the future of association leadership.
That's like 7 words.
Yeah, it's like a phrase, though.
Optimistic. That's 1 word, Adam.
Yeah, I just boiled it down too much.
Okay. Emily.
Yes, because I raised my hand. I would say intention. I think it's really important to be intentional in what you do and how you do it.
Who's next?
I'll say assessment. I really liked what Gabriel shared about trying to do different types of assessment of board diversity in their thought leadership.
Gabriel, what's your word?
If I make this a hashtag, I think it's 1 word. I'd say question bomb. But if that's rejected by the judges, then I think I'll piggyback on what Lauren just said and say diversity.
And I think Lowell, are you the last one?
Yeah, I mean, not to piggyback on Gabriel, but I feel like in all this it's been inclusion, right? Inclusion, professional voice, persona, volunteer. So not to be the peanut butter to the jelly, but inclusion.
And the one I think I would use is probably where we started in relationships, because I think that influences so much of that, and that really lays the groundwork for us to be able to do things about culture and change management and volunteer leadership and being deliberate and all these things. So I guess with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jacob. Jacob, if you want to start with your 1 word, and then
Brandon, we have a special inclusion for the end. Matt has been behind me the whole time, and he has volunteered to give us T-Rex hands before we. So Matt, a moment. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Well, my 1 word. Let's just say awesome. I appreciate all of you guys joining us on the Hangout today. Just all of you guys who spoke up and shared these wonderful thoughts and insights. I know I appreciate it. I know that our viewers tuning in appreciate it. And the ASAE Young Professionals Committee appreciates it. And we also appreciate those of you who tuned in from home, from work, wherever you happen to be. I was going to try to paste a link in a box for you for the survey, but you'll probably find the survey, the post-event survey, on the event page. And we'd really appreciate it if you gave us some feedback there. If you just need to fly out of here, though, leave us a comment on the event page before you check out. We want to know what you thought about the program, what you thought about the speakers, and ideas for future programs like this. So with that, I don't think that I have anything else to say. So thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Adios.